Family Ties, Broken Lies. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Portrait. Grace Foster always thought her family was just like any other in their leafy Chicago suburb. Flawed, but at the core, solid. Their two-story house with its blue shutters and perfectly trimmed hedges was the sort of place neighbors admired and envied. Inside, however, the foundations had started to crack long before anyone noticed. It began with the little things. Daniel, her husband, started coming home later from work, always armed with a new excuse: a traffic jam that lasted until midnight, or drinks with the guys that left him smelling like someone else's perfume. Grace noticed, of course. She always noticed. But she played her part, smiling for the neighbors and her daughter Emily, who was halfway out the door to college and always watching, always listening. Emily had grown skeptical of her father's stories. She saw the tension in her mother's jaw, the way Grace flinched when Daniel's phone buzzed late at night. But she kept her suspicions to herself, pouring her energy into school, soccer, and dreams of a life where secrets didn't hang in the air like fog. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned to fire outside their window, Daniel announced he'd invited Rebecca Harper for dinner. Rebecca had been Grace's best friend since high school. At least, that's what everyone believed. But over the years, Rebecca's presence in their lives had shifted from supportive to suffocating. She was everywhere, organizing school fundraisers, dropping by unannounced with just a bottle of wine, always full of suggestions about how the Fosters should live their lives. "Rebecca's coming by," Daniel said, not asking so much as informing. "She's bringing that new dessert she was bragging about." Grace nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Rebecca had become Daniel's confidant, or so it seemed, the one he turned to with news before he even told his own wife. That night, as the four of them sat around the table, Grace played the perfect hostess. She laughed at Rebecca's jokes, complimented her dessert, and ignored the way Daniel and Rebecca exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. Emily, for her part, barely touched her food, picking at her plate and watching the adults with a kind of detached curiosity. After dinner, as Grace washed dishes, she overheard Daniel and Rebecca talking in low voices on the patio. "You told her?" Rebecca whispered. "Not yet. Timing has to be right," Daniel replied, his tone tight. Grace froze, her hands shaking under the hot water. She waited, heart pounding, until the voices faded and footsteps creaked across the deck. That night, Grace lay awake, replaying every conversation, every glance. She remembered Rebecca's hand resting on Daniel's arm, the way Daniel lit up in her presence, the hollow explanations he offered every time he came home late. The pieces slid together with an awful clarity. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the family photos on the wall, all smiles and sunlight, hiding the storm underneath. That Saturday, while Daniel was out running errands, Grace's phone buzzed with a message from Mark, Daniel's estranged younger brother. "Heard from Mom lately? I'm in town. Need to talk. It's important." Grace blinked at the message. Mark was a ghost in their lives. Family legend said he'd burned every bridge years ago. Why now? Emily wandered in, saw her mother lost in thought, and for the first time asked, "Mom, are you okay?" Grace wanted to tell her everything, but she just smiled, tired. "Of course, sweetheart. Just a lot on my mind." But as the days grew colder, Grace knew something had to break. She was tired of pretending, tired of the secrets. The portrait of their family was beginning to fracture, and for the first time, Grace was ready to see what would happen when the truth finally broke through the cracks. Chapter 2. The Invitation. The week that followed Rebecca's dinner passed in slow, tense waves. Grace drifted through her routines like a sleepwalker, noticing details she used to ignore. Daniel's texts typed out a little too quickly, Rebecca's car parked 2 blocks away as if she were trying to hide it, Emily's new habit of double-locking her door at night. The chill that had settled over the house wasn't just autumn, it was suspicion, stretching into every corner, growing sharper with every unsaid word. Grace kept replaying that conversation she'd overheard between Daniel and Rebecca on the patio. Not yet. Timing has to be right. The sentence gnawed at her. What was he waiting to reveal? Was Rebecca pushing him, or were they in this together? Grace's thoughts churned until every gesture, every tone of voice felt like a clue. She barely slept, haunted by what-ifs. On Tuesday morning, Mark Foster called. The last time Grace had seen Mark, he'd been storming out of a family barbecue, yelling about Foster hypocrisy and vowing never to come back. Now, years later, his voice sounded older, tired, but determined. "Grace, I know it's weird me reaching out," he said, his voice crackling through the speakerphone, "but I heard about Mom's health, and Daniel isn't answering my calls. I need to see him. There's stuff you both need to know." Grace hesitated, her mind racing. What could Mark possibly know that would matter now? But curiosity won out. "Daniel's home late tonight," she said, "but I'll be here. Come by if you want." That evening, just as the sky faded to navy, Mark's battered pickup rolled into the driveway. He looked rougher than Grace remembered. Long hair, wrinkled flannel, old tattoos snaking down his arms. But there was a warmth in his eyes, the kind that came from being on the outside looking in. They sat at the kitchen table, awkward at first. Grace poured coffee. Mark drummed his fingers, both avoiding the family photos on the wall. "You look good, Grace," Mark finally said, half smiling. "Better than I deserve to see." She managed a laugh. "I doubt it, but thanks." Silence stretched between them, thick with the ghosts of old fights. Finally, Mark sighed. "I know I wasn't the best brother or uncle, but things got bad. Mom's health is worse than you think. She called me, said there are things in the family we all need to face." Grace's hands trembled. "Like what?" Mark shook his head. "She didn't say, just that Daniel's been keeping secrets. About Dad's will, about money, stuff that could change everything for you and Emily." Grace stared at him, her mind spinning. Another secret? Was Daniel hiding something even deeper than she feared? They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Grace flinched. Mark's face went pale. Outside stood Rebecca, holding a tray covered in foil. "Grace, sorry to barge in. I baked too much. Thought you could use some extra dessert," Rebecca said, all warmth and sparkle, though her eyes flicked suspiciously to Mark. Grace forced a smile. "Thanks, Rebecca. We were just catching up." Rebecca hesitated in the doorway, gaze shifting between Grace and Mark. "Oh, I didn't know you had company." Mark gave her a curt nod. "I'm just leaving." Rebecca lingered. "Well, I should be going too. Busy week." As she left, Grace watched her slip into her car, making a note of the way Rebecca checked her phone before pulling away. Mark stood to go, but paused at the door. "Don't trust everything Daniel tells you, or Rebecca. I know I'm not perfect, but some people are good at wearing masks." That night, Grace's head swirled with questions. If Daniel had lied about money, what else? Was Rebecca more than just a friend? And what was the real story behind Mark's sudden return? Wednesday, Daniel came home later than ever, reeking of expensive cologne. Grace almost confronted him, but bit her tongue. Instead, she watched him eat in silence, her mind filing away every detail. His distracted glances at his phone, the way he avoided eye contact. After dinner, Emily approached Grace. "Are you and Dad fighting?" Grace hesitated, unsure how much truth to reveal. "We're just dealing with a lot right now." Emily nodded. "He's lying to you, Mom. I know it. I hear him on the phone sometimes, talking about selling something, moving money, not work stuff." Grace's blood ran cold. She hugged Emily tightly, her resolve hardening. "Thank you for telling me, Em. We'll get through this. I promise." On Thursday, another invitation arrived. A formal, glossy envelope slipped under their door. It was from Rebecca. You're invited to the Harper and Foster Autumn Gala, Saturday, 7 p.m., an evening of friends, family, and new beginnings. Grace's hand shook as she read the invitation. New beginnings? Or the end of everything she thought she knew? The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm. But Grace, for the first time, felt something shift inside her. She was done being a bystander. If Daniel and Rebecca wanted to play games, she was ready to learn the rules and start making her own moves. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Attic. Saturday arrived with a sky like polished steel, cold and windless. Grace woke up early, nerves already frayed by the tension crackling through the house. The autumn gala loomed over her family like a storm cloud, everyone pretending it was just another party, while beneath the surface, secrets seethed and waited to erupt. Grace spent the morning tidying up, scrubbing countertops, as if she could erase the messiness inside herself. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. He'd left before dawn, mumbling about errands. Emily stayed in her room, headphones on, texting with friends but keeping one wary eye on her phone, watching for signs her parents were about to implode. Mark's text arrived at noon. Still in town. Meet before the gala? I have something you need to see. Grace's heart thudded. She texted back, arranging to meet at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. She didn't tell Daniel, and she certainly didn't tell Rebecca. Mark was already waiting, hunched over a battered notebook, face set with determination. As Grace sat, he pushed the notebook toward her. "It's Dad's," he said simply. "His private journal. I found it after Mom went into the hospital. There's stuff in here, about the will, about Daniel. He's been hiding money, Grace, transferring assets. Dad wanted things split equally, but Daniel's been funneling cash for years." Grace's hands trembled as she flipped through pages filled with tight, anxious handwriting. There were dates, sums, names she didn't recognize. Her throat closed as she realized the missing money Daniel blamed on bad investments was no accident. It was a cover-up. Mark leaned in, voice low. "He's planning to leave. Maybe with Rebecca. That's what Mom tried to warn me about. There's more, Grace. Rebecca. She's not just Daniel's confidant. They've been together. I saw them. And if you don't do something, you could lose everything." Grace's world tilted. She felt anger, grief, even a strange sense of relief. At least now the lies were out in the open. She closed the notebook and steadied herself. "What do I do?" Mark gave a grim smile. "You fight back. Tonight everyone will be there. Use that. Don't let Daniel and Rebecca control the story. If you want justice, you'll have to take it." Grace nodded, fire kindling in her chest. When she returned home, Emily was waiting in the kitchen. "Where were you?" Grace considered lying but stopped herself. "I was with your uncle. Emily, there are things I need to tell you." Emily's eyes widened. Is he cheating?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and there's more. He's been hiding money from us. Tonight, we need to be careful. Stay close to me at the party. Can you do that?" Emily's jaw clenched, tears shining in her eyes, but she nodded. "I don't care about the money, but I don't want to lose you, Mom." Grace hugged her daughter, resolve solidifying. They weren't going to let Daniel destroy their family without a fight. As dusk fell, the Fosters dressed in their best and drove to Rebecca's house, a sprawling, modern home with wide glass windows and manicured lawns. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with forced cheerfulness. Daniel was already there, mingling with guests, Rebecca glued to his side, her laughter a shade too bright. Grace and Emily stuck together, moving through the party like ghosts. Mark arrived late, hanging back, watching. It seemed everyone in their tight-knit community was present. Neighbors, co-workers, even Daniel's old college friends. The air was thick with gossip and cheap champagne. Midway through the evening, Rebecca clinked her glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming," she called, her voice ringing out. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating the season, it's about new beginnings and the family we choose." She smiled at Daniel, then at Grace, but there was a cold edge to it. Grace's heart pounded. She caught Mark's eye. He nodded, the notebook hidden under his arm. Rebecca continued, "And to make things even more special, Daniel and I have a little announcement." The room hushed. Daniel looked nervous, eyes darting to Grace, then to Emily, then back to Rebecca. Grace stepped forward, voice clear and strong. "Before you say anything, I have something to share." All eyes turned to her. Grace's hands shook, but her voice was steady. "This family has lived behind closed doors and secrets for too long, but tonight I'm done pretending. Daniel, would you like to explain what you've been doing with the family's money? Or should I?" the crowd murmured. Daniel's face drained of color. Grace continued, "Or maybe Rebecca would like to explain how she's helped cover up the truth. About the finances and about the affair?" The silence was electric. Rebecca's smile faltered. Daniel took a step back. Mark moved closer, pulling the notebook from his coat and laying it on the table for everyone to see. "Here's the truth," Grace said. "No more secrets. No more lies." The room exploded in whispers. Some guests tried to leave. Others pulled out their phones, recording. Daniel stammered, "Grace, we should talk about this privately." "No," Grace cut him off. "You made this public. Now everyone will know what family really means to you." Rebecca's mask cracked, her voice sharp. "You're ruining everything, Grace." Grace met her gaze, eyes blazing. "No, Rebecca, I'm finally fixing it." The scene was chaos, guests whispering, Daniel desperately trying to defend himself, Rebecca on the verge of tears, Mark standing guard. Through it all, Grace felt a strange calm. The storm had finally broken, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. But as the party unraveled, Grace knew this was only the beginning. The secrets were out, but the consequences, legal, emotional, and personal, were only just beginning to unfold. Chapter 4: The Shattered Dinner. The aftermath of Grace's public confrontation was an earthquake that shook the very foundation of the Foster family. By the end of Rebecca's autumn gala, the party had dissolved into scandal. Some guests hurried away, avoiding eye contact, while others clustered in gossipy knots on Rebecca's manicured lawn, replaying the drama in whispers and through the glowing screens of their phones. Inside the Harper house, Daniel and Rebecca stood together in the kitchen, their composure gone. Rebecca's hands shook as she poured herself a glass of wine. Daniel ran his fingers through his hair, sweat beading on his forehead. "How could you let her do that?" Rebecca hissed, voice sharp as broken glass. Daniel's jaw clenched. "You said you had it under control. You said she wouldn't find out." Rebecca's eyes flashed. "You told me you'd handled the money." Daniel turned away, his anger melting into panic. "If Grace has that journal, we're in trouble. I can't lose everything. Not now." Rebecca's voice lowered to a desperate whisper. "What about us? What about everything you promised?" Daniel stared at her, guilt and fear warring in his expression. "I don't know anymore." Meanwhile, Grace and Emily drove home in silence. Emily stared out the window, tears streaking her cheeks, while Grace gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. The city lights blurred by, but neither woman really saw them. When they arrived home, Grace sat at the kitchen table, numb. Emily curled up on the couch, clutching a pillow like a life raft. "Mom?" Emily's voice was small, scared. "What happens now?" Grace shook her head, voice hollow. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we're not going to hide anymore, no matter what comes next." At midnight, Daniel returned home. He stood in the doorway looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single night. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, voice hoarse. She looked up, cold and composed. "About the money? About Rebecca? Or about how you lied to me and Emily for years?" Daniel slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I never meant to hurt you. It got out of control. I thought I was protecting us. The investments went bad, and then the thing with Rebecca—" Grace cut him off. Don't you dare say her name in this house. Emily watched from the stairs, silent. Daniel's voice broke. I'm sorry, I'll fix it. I'll make it right. Grace shook her head. It's too late for that. Mark has the journal. He's already talking to a lawyer. Daniel's face drained of color. A lawyer? Grace stood, her composure returning like armor. Yes, and you should get one too. The next days were a blur of phone calls, tense silences, and awkward logistics. Mark, as promised, had handed the journal over to his mother's old attorney, who immediately flagged irregularities in Daniel's management of the estate. Grace found herself fielding calls from legal offices and accountants, forced to retell the story again and again, each time feeling the reality press heavier on her chest. Rebecca tried to reach out, first with apologetic texts, then with pleading voicemails. Grace, can we talk? Please, it's not what you think. Grace didn't answer. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. She deleted the messages and blocked Rebecca's number. Emily, meanwhile, avoided her father entirely. At home, she moved in silence, headphones on, lost in a world where her family hadn't imploded. At school, rumors spread faster than wildfire. Friends whispered about the Foster scandal. Teachers offered pitying glances. Emily felt exposed, humiliated, and furious. But she stood by her mother, refusing to let the shame win. Daniel's world crumbled rapidly. At work, his boss called him into the office. We need to talk about your family situation, Daniel. It's all over social media. We can't afford this kind of attention right now. Neighbors avoided his gaze. Former friends needed space. Even Rebecca, who'd once been so sure of her own charm, found herself isolated. Invitations to lunch evaporated, and her reputation in their tight-knit community was poisoned. The legal process moved quickly. Mark's lawyer uncovered multiple unauthorized transfers and misappropriations. Grace was called in for a deposition, where she described years of strange withdrawals, Daniel's evasive answers, the growing tension in their home. Each retelling made her stronger, her anger hardening into resolve. One evening, after another long day of paperwork and lawyers, Mark stopped by with groceries. You holding up? He asked quietly. Grace managed a tired smile. Barely. But I'm not breaking, Mark. Not now. He nodded. We'll get through this. And when it's over, you'll be free. That night, Grace sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by silence. She looked at the wedding photo on the fridge. Herself and Daniel, younger and smiling, a future full of promise. She peeled the photo down, folded it, and put it in a drawer. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The first court hearing was set for Friday. Grace dressed carefully, choosing a dark suit and tying her hair back with steady hands. Emily offered a silent hug before Grace left, Mark driving her downtown. At the courthouse, Daniel looked defeated, his suit hanging loose, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Rebecca wasn't there. Her lawyer had advised her to keep her distance. Mark sat with Grace, offering steady, silent support. The judge listened to the initial evidence, paging through the journal, the bank statements, the affidavits. Daniel's attorney tried to stall, arguing that all families have disputes, but the paper trail was clear. When the judge ruled that Daniel's assets be frozen until further review, Daniel crumpled. Grace felt no joy, only relief and a weary sense that justice, however slow, was finally beginning to turn in her direction. Outside, reporters snapped photos, shouting questions. Grace kept her eyes forward, Mark at her side, Emily waiting at home. Their family would never be the same. But for the first time, Grace allowed herself a fragile hope. Maybe, just maybe, she and Emily could build something new. Something honest. But as they drove away, Mark warned her, "It's not over yet. Daniel's desperate. People do stupid things when they're cornered." Grace nodded, but inside, her fear was gone. She was tired of being afraid. Now she was ready. Whatever came next. That night, as the wind rattled the windows, Daniel sat alone in the darkened living room, eyes fixed on nothing. The house felt empty. He thought of Rebecca, of Grace, of everything he'd lost and everything he'd thrown away. He heard the echo of his daughter's voice, the memory of laughter in the kitchen, but in the silence, only regret answered back. The Foster family's story wasn't finished. Not yet. Chapter 5. Cold Justice. The first frost dusted the Chicago suburbs in pale silver as Grace began to transform. No longer just a victim, she found a new role. Architect of her own future, strategist in a battle that was no longer just about survival, but about justice and reclaiming power. The weeks that followed the first court hearing turned her from a woman seeking answers to a woman who made moves. Every day brought a new challenge. Daniel, stripped of his financial influence and status, grew increasingly erratic. He left angry messages, pleaded with Grace, tried to guilt-trip Emily into forgiving him. His world, once a carefully constructed facade, was collapsing. Rebecca, now a pariah in the community, sent desperate emails begging Grace to just talk and help Daniel see reason. Grace ignored them all. With Mark's help and the relentless efforts of their lawyer, Grace began a full audit of the family finances. What she uncovered was worse than she'd imagined. Not just hidden accounts, but loans taken out in her name, investments that had bled the family dry, even a failed attempt to sell their home without her consent. Their lawyer, Ms. Brenner, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for destroying liars in court, encouraged Grace to pursue criminal charges if necessary. He left a paper trail a mile long, Brenner said, flipping through folders. You have leverage now. Use it, not just for yourself, but for Emily. Grace felt the anger harden into something colder, more focused. She wasn't out for revenge, not in the petty sense. She wanted Daniel to answer for every lie, every betrayal, every stolen dollar. Meanwhile, Emily fought her own battles. At school, she was the subject of gossip and whispers. Some friends vanished, others rallied around her, drawn by her quiet strength. One afternoon, a former friend confronted her in the hallway, sneering, "Your mom's just bitter, you know. My dad says all divorces are messy." Emily squared her shoulders, looking the girl dead in the eyes. "Maybe, but I'd rather have a bitter mom than a fake family." The remark spread, and soon the narrative shifted. Emily wasn't a victim, but a survivor. For the first time, she felt a kind of power. As the next court date approached, Daniel tried to regain control. He hired a high-powered attorney, launched a countersuit alleging emotional distress and parental alienation. Grace received a thick envelope of legal threats, most of them designed to intimidate rather than resolve. Mark, however, was ready. He compiled a meticulous timeline of Daniel's misdeeds, receipts, and emails. Ms. Brenner coached Grace through mock cross-examinations, teaching her how to remain calm under attack. One evening, as they prepared, Mark confided, "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be the one holding this family together." Grace smiled, weary but grateful. "I never thought I'd have to, but here we are." The second court hearing was even more dramatic than the first. Daniel's lawyer tried to paint Grace as manipulative, using Emily as a pawn. Grace remained steady, answering every question with quiet force. Then, in a move that stunned even the judge, Mark provided a recording, a voicemail from Daniel, left in a moment of rage, admitting to the thefts and calling Grace too stupid to notice. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's attorney blanched. Ms. Brenner seized the moment. "Your Honor, this is not just a family dispute. This is fraud. This is abuse of trust. My client seeks full custody and restitution." The judge nodded, expression grave. "I will review all evidence and make a ruling within the week. In the meantime, Mr. Foster, you are barred from accessing any joint assets or contacting your wife and daughter outside of legal channels." Daniel slumped in his chair. Grace felt a rush of relief, but also a sense of finality. This was the end of something, but not the end of her journey. After court, the media descended. Cameras flashed, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Grace shielded Emily, answering only a few questions. "All I want is what's fair for my daughter and me. No more, no less." That evening, Grace sat with Emily at the kitchen table, the two of them sharing quiet comfort. "Are we safe now?" Emily asked. Grace nodded, brushing hair from her daughter's face. "We're safer than we've ever been, but there's still work to do." Late that night, Grace wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, not to Rebecca, but to herself. She wrote down everything she'd learned about trust, resilience, and the strength she'd never known she possessed. She folded the letter and put it in the old family album, between photos of a happier time. She didn't need revenge to feel victorious. She just needed freedom. And now, she could almost taste it. A few days later, Grace received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph: Daniel and Rebecca, sitting close together at a bar, time-stamped just days before the confrontation. On the back, scrawled in a messy hand, "You're not the only one with secrets. Watch your back." Grace stared at the photo, her heartbeat quickening. Not out of fear, but with a cold, determined clarity. "Let them try," she whispered. "I'm done being afraid." As the winter deepened, Grace and Emily began to rebuild. Every day, the house felt a little less haunted. There were still scars, still whispers, but now there was also laughter. Hesitant at first, then genuine. Justice wasn't always clean. It wasn't always loud. But for the first time, Grace was in control of her story, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her again. Chapter 6. The Last Word. Winter in Chicago is never gentle. Icy winds clawed at the windows, howling through the Foster house as if desperate to sweep away the last remnants of chaos. For weeks after the court's decision, Grace and Emily navigated a strange new quiet. Not peace, exactly, but the kind of silence that follows a storm. The world outside continued its daily grind, but inside, life was rearranging itself from the ground up. Daniel, once the master of the house, was gone. The court order barred him from any contact with Grace and Emily outside official legal channels. His assets frozen, his reputation in ruins, he moved into a small rental on the edge of the city, surrounded by cardboard boxes and regrets. Rebecca faded from the neighborhood almost overnight, her new beginning story ending with a whimper rather than a bang. Her house sat dark, a for sale sign out front, a monument to promises broken. For the first time in years, Grace didn't wake up bracing for battle. The phone was no longer a weapon. There were no more threats, no more secrets leaking from the shadows. The legal process was grinding on, slowly chewing through Daniel's tangled finances, but Grace left most of it to her lawyer. She focused on her real work, building something new for herself and her daughter. Emily took longer to heal. At school, some classmates tried to use her family's scandal for cruel amusement, but the worst had already happened. Emily found unexpected allies. A teacher who'd once seemed indifferent offered support. A shy girl from English class sat beside her at lunch. One night, as the wind battered the house, Emily finally opened up. "Do you ever wish things could go back to the way they were?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace thought for a long moment. "Sometimes, but mostly, I'm glad they're over. We can start fresh now, just us." Emily nodded, wiping away a tear. "I believe you." As months passed, the Foster house changed. Grace repainted the kitchen, swapping out tired yellow for a fresh blue. She sold off Daniel's expensive stereo system, used the money to book a small vacation for her and Emily. For the first time, the house felt like theirs. One afternoon, Mark dropped by with his own news. "Mom's doing better," he reported, relief softening his usual gruffness. "She wants to see you, both of you." Grace smiled. "We'll visit this weekend. Tell her, thank you." As they sat in the kitchen, Mark grew quiet. "You know, Dad was never perfect, but he wanted his kids to do better than he did. I think you finally broke the cycle, Grace." She let the words settle, feeling the truth in them. The Fosters had been a family of secrets for generations, Now, for the first time, everything was out in the open, ugly, painful, but real. Daniel's story didn't have a redemption arc. He tried to reach out once, writing a long, rambling letter filled with apologies, excuses, and nostalgia. Grace read it in silence, then folded it up and placed it with the others, not out of malice, but because she was done looking backward. Rebecca resurfaced one more time. A terse email, subject line, closure. She wrote, "I hope one day you'll understand. We were all broken in different ways." Grace never replied. Instead, she threw herself into work and motherhood. Emily blossomed, rediscovering passions for art and soccer. Grace made new friends, joined a book club, volunteered at a shelter on weekends. Their lives grew outward, no longer defined by the shadow of Daniel and Rebecca. The legal process finally concluded in early spring. The judge granted Grace full custody of Emily, awarded her the house and restitution for Daniel's financial misdeeds. Daniel was ordered into counseling, his contact with Emily limited to supervised visits. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, just a short ruling, a sense of finality. Grace and Emily celebrated with dinner at their favorite diner. Pancakes for dinner, laughter echoing across the booth. Mark joined them, raising a glass to new beginnings. To the Fosters, the real kind. As the seasons turned and the city thawed, life took on a steadier rhythm. There were hard days, moments when grief or anger flared up, but they faded faster now. Grace and Emily planted a garden in the backyard, pulling weeds, turning soil, planting hope. Grace started writing, first in a battered journal, then online, sharing her story anonymously. Her words resonated. People from all over sent messages, sharing their own pain, their own triumphs. Grace replied to as many as she could, offering encouragement, advice, or just a listening ear. In giving voice to her pain, she found purpose. Sometimes, late at night, Grace would walk the empty house, listening to the wind, marveling at the silence. Not the silence of fear, silence of a story finished, a burden lifted. One day, as she stood in the backyard, the sun on her face, Emily called out, "Mom, come see!" Grace hurried over. Emily knelt beside a patch of earth, holding up a tiny green shoot. "It's growing," Emily said, grinning. Grace knelt beside her, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, it is. We are." In the end, the Foster family was smaller, but stronger. The wounds of betrayal didn't vanish, but they didn't define them. They had survived the storm, rebuilt with their own hands, and found hope in the cracks where the light could finally get in. For anyone who watched their story from the outside, there was one lesson, clear as day. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to burn the old house down and build something true from the ashes.